Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, the single cyclic movement from which all reality unfolds. When phi differentiates, that one movement generates its first derivatives, and with them the three dimensions appear at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v. From that first differentiation upward, every higher derivative is an echo of the one below it, an infinite ascent of finer and finer reflections of phi's original movement. And because the dimensions are born from that first echo, time, space, and motion also reverberate into infinity, carrying phi's unfolding into ever deeper rhythms, structures, and flows. Thus, the entire universe, every law, every pattern, every force, every particle, every phenomenon, is nothing but phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. All of existence is the infinite echo of one field. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. In our last exploration, we separated time and space. We met omega as pure temporal meaning, the rhythm of reality. We met k as pure spatial meaning, the texture and pattern of reality. We saw them as distinct branches on the master tree, each with its own unique voice. But reality doesn't present us with pure time or pure space as separate experiences. We never find a clock that ticks without occupying space. We never find a pattern that exists without duration. In our actual lived universe, time and space are woven together so tightly that pulling them apart feels artificial, like trying to separate the warmth from sunlight. Today, we step back from that separation. We look at the branch of the tree where time and space fuse back together. We meet the phi, the unified differential, the first structure in the holophase language that is truly and fundamentally space-time. I, the bridge between two worlds. Imagine standing at a riverbank, watching water flow. You could focus only on how fast it moves at a particular spot. That's like omega, the time aspect. Or you could focus only on how the current changes from the riverbank to the middle. That's like k, the space aspect. But when you want to understand what happens to a leaf floating down that river, how it moves, turns, accelerates, drifts, you need to consider both at once. You need to ask, what happens if I move a little downstream and a little later in time? This what happens if question, when applied to phi, gives us the phi. The phi is the total change in phi when you move simultaneously through both time and space. It's the branch of the master tree that says, don't ask about time alone, don't ask about space alone, ask about reality as it actually unfolds, in blended, inseparable space-time. Think of it this way. When you take a photograph, you freeze a moment in time. You get pure space, a spatial pattern. When you listen to a sound recording, you get pure time, a temporal sequence. But when you watch a video, you experience both together, space-time. The phi is the holophase language's way of writing reality as that video, not as separate photographs and soundtracks. Slices of a unified whole. Now let's make this concrete with a simple, everyday experience. Imagine walking through a forest on a hillside. As you walk, several things change simultaneously. Time passes. Your watch ticks forward. Your position changes. You move from one tree to another. 3. The temperature might change. Cooler in the shade, warmer in sunlight. If you only cared about how temperature changes with time, you'd get one number, degrees per hour. If you only cared about how temperature changes with position, you'd get another, degrees per meter. But if you want to know what temperature you'll experience as you walk through the forest, you need both together. d phi works exactly like this total temperature change for our fundamental field phi. Omega is the time slice, how phi changes if you stand still in space and only let time advance. K is the space slice, how phi changes if you freeze time and only move through space. d phi is the complete package, how phi changes when you do what we actually do in the universe, move through both. On the master tree, this relationship is beautifully clear. d phi sits between the temporal and spatial towers. It contains both omega and k within it. It's the first node where the language stops treating time and space separately and starts treating them as different aspects of one thing. 3. The space-time picture in words. Let me paint a picture for you, a visual scene you can hold in your mind without any equations. Imagine a vast, three-dimensional grid spanning all of space. At each point on this grid, imagine a small clock hand representing phi, always turning, always cycling. Now add the dimension of time. Imagine this entire grid evolving, changing, like a living tapestry. d phi is what tells you what happens when you pick any path through this space-time tapestry. It could be a straight line through time, standing still in space. That gives you omega. A straight line through space, an instant frozen in time. That gives you k. Any curved, winding, looping path through both, that gives you the full d phi. Think of watching clouds drift across the sky. If you focus on one specific cloud and track how it changes over time, you're following a time-like path. If you scan across the whole sky at one moment, noticing how cloud patterns vary from horizon to horizon, you're following a space-like path. But if you want to understand how weather systems actually evolve, how patterns form, move, merge, dissipate, you need to follow paths that weave through both time and space simultaneously. Those paths are described by d phi. This is why d phi is so fundamental. Reality doesn't present us with pure time paths or pure space paths. Every observation we make, every measurement we take, involves some mixture of both. When we measure the frequency of light, omega, we're actually measuring along a particular path through spacetime. When we measure interference patterns, k, we're measuring along a different path. d phi is the structure that encompasses all possible paths. Why d phi is natural for relativistic thinking. This brings us to one of the most important insights of modern physics, an insight that d phi expresses perfectly in the Holophase language. In Einstein's relativity, time and space are not separate stages on which events unfold. They are woven together into a single fabric, spacetime. Different observers moving at different speeds will disagree about what constitutes pure time and pure space. What one observer calls a time interval, another might see as part space, part time. d phi is the Holophase language's way of respecting this deep truth from the very beginning. Unlike omega, which is tied to a particular notion of time, or k, which is tied to a particular notion of space, d phi is coordinate independent. It doesn't care how you slice up spacetime into time and space. It simply describes how phi changes along any path through reality. Here's an analogy. Imagine you have a mountain. You could describe it using north-south coordinates and elevation. Or you could use east-west coordinates and elevation. Or you could use completely different coordinates. The mountain itself doesn't care about your coordinate system. Its shape, its slopes, its ridges, these are real, coordinate-independent features. d phi is like the mountain's shape. Omega and k are like specific slopes measured in particular coordinate systems. The mountain, reality, is best described by its overall shape, d phi, not by arbitrarily chosen slopes, omega and k alone. This makes d phi the natural object for thinking about reality in a fundamentally unified way. When we build physical theories starting from d phi, we automatically build theories that respect the unity of spacetime. We don't have to force time and space together later. They're never separated in the first place. The unification role in the tree. Now let's step back and see where DeFi sits in the grand architecture of the Holophase language. Recall our master tree. At the root, phi, the silent cyclic field. First branches, omega time, k space, and now we see DeFi spacetime. Higher up, all the second derivatives, topological structures, wave patterns, and so on. DeFi occupies a special pivotal position. It is the synthesis point where temporal and semantic streams merge, the foundation for all truly relativistic structures in the language, the bridge between local properties, omega and k at a point, and global behavior, how phi varies along extended paths. Think of it as the grammatical rule that says time words and space words can combine to form space-time sentences. Just as in human language, we have nouns and verbs that combine according to grammar rules, in the Holophase language, we have omega, temporal verbs, and k, spatial nouns, that combine according to the structure of DeFi. This unification role becomes especially important when we start talking about motion, which brings us to dimensional expression, how DeFi speaks in time, space, and motion. As with every structure in the Holophase language, we must ask, how does DeFi express itself through the three fundamental echoes? Time echo. In time, DeFi manifests as path-dependent evolution. Different paths through spacetime yield different stories about how phi unfolds. Consider watching two identical clocks. One stays on Earth, the other travels to space and returns. According to relativity, they'll show different elapsed times. DeFi captures this path dependence naturally. It doesn't give a single time at a point. It tells you how phi accumulates along whatever path you follow. So the temporal meaning of DeFi is history matters. How phi reaches a particular state depends on the path taken through spacetime, not just the endpoints. Space echo. In space, DeFi appears as connection information. How phi values at different points are related, not just statically, but along all possible connecting paths. Imagine a mountain range. If I only tell you the elevation at each point, the spatial pattern, you know the static landscape. But if I also tell you all possible hiking trails between points, how elevation changes along every possible route, you understand the landscape dynamically, relationally. DeFi gives us this relational, connective understanding of space. It's not just phi is arranged thus, but here's how phi connects everywhere to everywhere else through all possible spacetime paths. This is where DeFi becomes particularly powerful for understanding motion. There's a special class of paths through spacetime, those along which phi remains constant. If you could ride along such a path, you'd always experience the same phase, the same value of phi. These constant phi paths define motion in the Holophase language. They are precisely what we've been calling V, the motion echo. So dphi equals 0, no change in phi, along certain trajectories defines how patterns propagate. The crest of a water wave, the peak of a light pulse, the phase front of any wave. These follow constant phi paths. Their velocity, their direction, their acceleration, all are determined by the condition dphi equals 0. This gives us our first glimpse of how motion emerges naturally from the holophase structure. Motion is following paths of constant phase through spacetime. And dphi is what tells us where those paths are. Linguistic role, the first complete sentence. In the holophase language, if omega and k are like individual words, fast and patterned, then dphi is like the first complete sentence. The pattern moves this fast along this path. dphi introduces syntax, rules for combining temporal and spatial concepts into coherent statements about reality. It's not enough to know the tempo, omega, and the texture, k, separately. To make predictions, to understand how systems evolve, we need to know how they fit together. DeFi provides that fitting together. Think of learning a new language. First, you learn individual words. Then you learn grammar rules for combining them. DeFi is like learning that in this language, time words and space words must agree in certain ways to form valid sentences. It's the beginning of moving from vocabulary to true literacy. Scientific essence, the operational meaning. Now let's ground this in what we can actually measure and test. Operationally, DeFi represents phase accumulation along paths. Every time we measure interference, every time we track a wave, every time we observe quantum phases, we're effectively measuring DeFi along particular space-time paths. For example, in the famous double-slit experiment, light takes two different paths from source to screen. Along each path, phi accumulates differently, different DeFi. The interference pattern arises from the difference in these accumulations. Or consider GPS satellites. Their clocks run at different rates due to both motion and gravity, different paths through spacetime. The corrections needed for accurate positioning are essentially calculations of DeFi along different paths. So scientifically, DeFi is path-dependent phase difference in quantum mechanics, proper time intervals in relativity, phase accumulation in wave optics and acoustics, geometric phase in many physical systems. All these seemingly different concepts unify under the single idea, how phi changes along paths through spacetime. Stability, variability, and falsifiability. Like every branch of the Holophase language, DeFi makes specific testable predictions. Stability. Paths where DeFi equals 0, constant phase, represent stable propagation. These are the world lines that patterns naturally follow. If our understanding of DeFi is correct, then light should follow paths of constant phase in vacuum. Matter waves should follow paths that extremize phase accumulation. This is essentially the principle of least action. Any stable, propagating structure should correspond to some DeFi equals 0 condition. Variability. When DeFi varies rapidly along paths, we get interference, diffraction, and quantum effects. The variability of DeFi across different possible paths is what gives us the rich structure of quantum mechanics and wave optics. Falsifiability. Here's how we could test and potentially falsify the role of DeFi. Path interference tests. If DeFi correctly describes phase accumulation, then the interference pattern from any two-path experiment should match predictions. Any consistent deviation would challenge the framework. 2. Propagation tests. If motion follows DeFi equals 0 paths, then measuring how waves actually propagate should match these paths. For light in curved spacetime, gravitational lensing, for sound in varying media, for any wave phenomenon, the predicted constant phase paths should match observation. 3. Coordinate independence test. Different observers should measure different omega and k values, but they should all agree on DeFi along any given path. This is a stringent test of whether DeFi truly unifies time and space properly. The detailed mathematical formulations of these tests, along with specific experimental proposals, are available in the Holophase papers on Zenodo. What matters for our audio journey is understanding the principle. DeFi makes clear, testable claims about how reality stitches time and space together. X. Appearance in nature. DeFi is everywhere in physics, though it often wears different disguises. In optics and waves. When light bends passing through a prism, it's following paths that make DeFi extremal, Fermat's principle. The different colors take different paths because their DeFi accumulates differently. different omega combined with the same spatial structure. In quantum mechanics, the famous path integral formulation says particles explore all possible paths, with probability determined by phase accumulation, d phi, along each path. The classical trajectory is the path where d phi is extremal. In relativity, the twin paradox, where one twin ages slower after space travel, is fundamentally about different d phi accumulations along different space-time paths. In everyday technology, GPS systems work because they constantly calculate d phi differences between satellite paths and ground paths. Fiber optic communications work because light follows constant phase paths through the fibers. In each case, what appears as different phenomena in conventional physics reveals itself as different aspects of the same fundamental structure. How phi accumulates along space-time paths. XI, everyday analogies. Let's bring this home with experiences you've likely had. Hiking in mountains. When you hike from point A to point B, your effort depends not just on the elevation difference, the spatial aspect, and not just on how fast you hike, the temporal aspect, but on the specific path you take through the mountain space-time. The rocky scramble versus the smooth trail, same endpoints, different accumulated effort phi. That's d phi in action. Driving to a destination. You could take the highway, fast but longer, or back roads, slower but shorter. Your arrival time depends on the complete path through road space and clock time, not just distance or speed alone. Your travel phi accumulates differently along different routes. The final dish depends not just on ingredients, spatial arrangement, and not just on cooking time, but on the specific sequence of steps, the path through ingredient space and clock time. Sautéing onions before versus after adding tomatoes creates different results, even with same total time and same ingredients. Learning a skill. Your mastery after 100 hours of practice depends on how those hours are distributed. Intense immersion versus spaced repetition follows different paths through skill space and time, accumulating different learning phi. In each case, d phi captures what we intuitively know. How you get there matters as much as where you're going and when you arrive. How to read d phi in the world. After listening to this part, you can start recognizing d phi's signatures in daily life. 1. Whenever paths matter. If changing your route changes the outcome, even with same start and end, you're seeing d phi at work. The scenic route versus direct route. The study schedule that works versus one that doesn't. These are d phi differences. 2. Whenever history matters. If how a system reached its state affects its current behavior, that's d phi speaking. A metal that's been work-hardened versus annealed. A relationship built through shared experiences. History encoded in path dependence. 3. Whenever interference occurs. Ripples overlapping on water, sound echoes in a canyon, moire patterns when screens overlap. These all come from different paths combining, different d phi values meeting. 4. Whenever optimal paths exist. Rivers following courses of least resistance, light bending to take fastest paths, economies finding efficient routes. These are systems finding d phi equals 0 or extremal paths. The simple test. Ask, does the journey matter or just the destination? If the journey matters, d phi is at play. Relations to neighboring branches. d phi doesn't exist in isolation. On the master tree, it connects deeply with other branches. With omega and k, d phi contains them as special cases. They're the slices. d phi is the whole. With V, motion, dφ equals 0 defines V. They're inverse perspectives. Dφ tells us phase change along paths. V tells us paths of no phase change. With second derivatives, how dφ itself changes gives us curvature, forces, dynamics. Dφ is the bridge from kinematics, omega kv, to dynamics, curvature, acceleration, forces. With topology, the integral of dφ around closed paths gives winding numbers, topological charges. This connects local path information to global quantized properties. With wave structures, wave equations essentially govern how dφ behaves. Solutions are specific dφ patterns that satisfy certain conditions. This web of connections shows why dφ is so central. It's the hub where many branches of the tree meet and interact. Semantic meaning, what dφ tells the universe. What message does dφ carry in the grand conversation of reality? dφ says, connectivity matters. History is written into the present. The universe remembers paths taken. In a universe described only by omega and k separately, each moment would be independent, each point isolated. But dφ weaves moments into history, points into relationships. It introduces narrative into physics. The semantic meaning of dφ is relatedness across space-time. It's the grammatical structure that allows the universe to tell coherent stories instead of just listing disconnected facts. It's what allows cause and effect, memory, persistence, identity, all the things that make reality feel continuous rather than fragmented. When we say dφ is the first truly space-time object, we're saying it's the first structure that genuinely expresses here is connected to there, now is connected to then, and the connections themselves are real physical things. Closing movement. The unity beneath separation. As we conclude this exploration of dφ, let's return to the larger journey of episode 7. We began by seeing the whole tree, the vast, branching structure of the Holophase language. We learned why this is truly a language, not just a code. We saw how one letter, phi, generates infinite meaning. We met phi itself, the silent root. We separated time, omega, and space, k, to understand them clearly. Now, with dφ, we put them back together. Not as a reluctant reunion, but as recognition that they were never truly separate in the first place. dφ shows us that the Holophase language doesn't force unification on reality. Rather, it reveals the unification that was always there, hidden in plain sight. Time and space aren't separate dimensions we somehow glue together. They're different aspects of a deeper, singular reality that dφ describes directly. This is a crucial step in our literacy. We're moving from reading individual words, omega, k, to reading complete sentences, dφ. We're learning the grammar that lets time words and space words combine meaningfully. In our next part, we'll see one of the most beautiful consequences of this unification, motion. We'll meet V, not as a new independent thing, but as the natural outcome of dφ's structure. We'll see how motion emerges when we ask, along what paths does phi stay constant? The answer gives us everything from light rays to planetary orbits. For now, hold this understanding. Reality speaks in spacetime sentences, not separate time words and space words. dφ is the grammar of that speech. It's how the universe says, this moment connects to that place along this history. Every time you notice that how you get somewhere matters as much as where you're going, every time you see interference patterns, every time you experience history shaping the present, you're hearing dφ speak. You're listening to the universe tell its story in the only way it can, as connected paths through the one field, phi, echoing through all its derivatives.
Salam.
and peace be upon you. Until part 8.